Hello everybody and welcome to our professional development webinar series. Thank you for joining us for Neil Parent's presentation, The Emerging Models Project, Key Pastoral Implications. For those of you here for the first time, my name is Jared Dees and I'm the Digital Publishing Specialist at Ave Maria Press, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. This webinar is brought to you exclusively by Ave Maria Press in partnership with the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the National Federation of Priests' Councils. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, which you can see displayed here. Please take a minute to find that box for typing questions in your GoToWebinar panel. Simply click the send button at the bottom of the right-hand corner to send your questions to our presenter, and I will read as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. I would also like to note that the webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you later this week via email, so please watch your inboxes. Now that we've gone through all the technical information, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our presenter, Neil Parent. Neil teaches and works as an independent consultant for Catholic organizations, parishes, and dioceses. He serves as the executive director of the national. He served as the national executive director of the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership from 1990 to 2007. And prior to this position, he served for 12 years as representative for adult education at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. In this capacity, Parent edited 10 books on adult catechesis, all published by the USCCB. And he has written numerous articles for such publications as Our Sunday Visitor, Catechetical Leader, and Faith Alive. Additionally, he served 7 years as the Director of Adult Faith Formation at the Blessed Sacrament Parish in Alexandria, Virginia. Neil, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you for having me. And hello, everybody. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you. And Jared, are you going to now give me, there it is.
There you go.
Okay. Gives me the opportunity now to show my screen. And here we go.
Looking good.
There it is. Okay. Let me take this away so I can see what's going on. Now, before I get started, let me just say a few words about what you're about to hear and view. For those of you that saw the original advertisement for this webinar, it indicated that it was going to be based on a seminar that was going to take place in October the 29th and 30th. And I was going to present the results of that seminar. Well, unfortunately, Sandy came along, and we could not have that seminar. But what I'm going to present to you are some salient points that I've drawn from the 5 reports that were submitted and that were going to serve as the basis of that seminar. So you'll have a lot of the information. It will be, in a sense, a kind of a sneak preview for you because the seminar has been rescheduled for late January. And our presenters will be there, the ones that is to say, that wrote the reports, and they're going to share those with the participants at the seminar, and then those reports will be refined and eventually posted on our website. So you will get a little indication as to some of the findings, and that's what I'm focusing on, the findings, not the recommendations or some of the other material that's in the reports, but on the findings, because we do have a limited amount of time. So if any of our report writers are listening in, I ask your forgiveness already if I don't cover a particular point that you thought was essential, but I had to make some choices. And then once the symposium has happened, all of the reports, both the CARA data reports and all of these 5 reports that I'm going to speak about today, along with some other reports, will all be posted on the Emerging Models website. And at the very last slide, there'll be an indication of where that is, but I'll give it to you now. It's very simple, www.emergingmodels.com. So with that, let me get started. And here are the 5 organizations that are part of this Emerging Models project: the National Association for Lay Ministry, the Conference for Pastoral Planners and Council Development, the National Association for Church Personnel Administrators, and the National Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association, and finally the National Federation of Priest Councils. Now these 5 organizations have 6 initiatives that they've come up with that are part of this second phase of the Emerging Models project. For those of you that have Familiarity with the first phase, you know that began in 2003, and it culminated in a major summit meeting in Orlando in 2008. And then the Lilly Foundation, who had funded that endeavor, funded this second phase. And these 5 organizations put before Lilly 6 objectives that they wanted to accomplish. And so here they are. First, there is the second phase, if you will, because it began in phase 1, of the Parish Life Coordinator Study. And that's to survey parishioners regarding their attitude toward and acceptance of Parish Life Coordinators and the impact of this emerging model on parish, on their life of faith. So that is a very important one because there are about 450 Parish Life Coordinators right now, and it was very important for us to find out how well is that going. Secondly, there is the engagement of young adults in the next generation of pastoral leaders. And in phase 1, we looked at how they're being called into ministry. This focused on their understanding of their needs and aspirations for them as lay ecclesial ministers. Thirdly, the pastoral leadership in a multicultural church. We wanted to find out, as our nation becomes much more diverse, how different cultures call forth leadership and what the pastoral leaders need to prepare for ministry in diverse communities. Fourth, we looked at multiple parish ministry. We wanted to understand and support the ministry of lay and ordained pastoral leaders in multiple parish settings. Fifth, we looked at the role of business managers and parish finance councils so that we surveyed their roles and the reality of them in the life of the parish and what are their training needs and so forth. And as you'll see as I go through this presentation, this is becoming a more critical issue because our parishes are growing larger and therefore more complex in the sense of technology, human resources, fiscal responsibility and policies and so forth. And so this becomes a very important role for us to look at these 2 categories of business manager and finance councils. And finally, the assessment of parish staffing and salary levels. We wanted to survey what salary levels are out there, the benefits that went with them, and so forth. Now, this last one was quickly done based on the data that we got from the first CARA survey. And that was published in very early 2011 with the title of the Salaries and Benefits of Ecclesial Ministers. So anyway, that's available from both the National Association for Lay Ministry and for the National Association of Personnel Administrators. You can order a copy of that. I will not be reporting on that. I'll be reporting on the other 5 because this report came out nearly 2 years ago. Let me try to put this, what I'm trying to do, in some kind of a narrative, if you will. And let me start by saying that these 5 organizations decided that the only way they could go about their second task in the second phase was to get quantitative data in which they could base their approach to trying to understand what was going on with their particular initiative. And so the Center for Applied Research in the Apostolate, which we all know popularly as CARA, was hired to do 3 major surveys, which you can see down there at the bottom of your screen. So CARA sent out 15,000 plus invitations for pastors or parish life coordinators to participate by filling out a survey. It was a single respondent survey, and 846 responded, which is about a 15% return, which is about average for this kind of thing. And that data was gathered and published under the title of The Changing Face of U.S. Catholic Parishes, and it's available on our Emerging Models website. In addition, then, they wanted to look at how parish leaders felt about a number of aspects of their parish. And we had 532 parish leaders respond from some 246 parishes there, representing 246 parishes. And that is also published on our website under the title of Perspectives from Parish Leaders, U.S. Parish Life and Ministry. Finally, the emphasis of the 5 organizations was we want to know how people in the pew feel about what is going on with regards to what we're trying to ascertain. And so some 13,614 plus, and the plus is important because just this week we are adding still more data into this final report. And we have it in a preliminary form, but it's not yet on the website because we have to finish that report Kara informed me, and although they're looking at the end of this week. So hopefully by the beginning of next week, those of you who are listening here can go to our website and see the report, and I think the title will be, as I indicate here, the demographics and data tables views from the pew. So what I want to do is see if I can, as I said a little earlier, put this in some kind of narrative. Let me begin by doing that by talking a little bit, which we did at the very first webinar, about the Catholic population. So here's where we are. We are currently, when we started this study, at 77.7 million Catholics, which is about 25% of the U.S. population. And you see three profiles there. The top one, the 128 million for what it would look like in 2050, represents our staying on a course of 25% of the U.S. population. So there would be 128 million of us Catholics in the United States. If, in fact, the immigration begins to fall off, birth rate begins to slow up a little bit, we might fall to 95.4 million. But the most reasonable approach might be to see us as well over 100 million Catholics in the United States. And this is important for several reasons. Let me show you now another slide that we're becoming more diverse. And you may recall, and here I'm pointing out, if you look at the top bar, those are for Catholics born before the Second Vatican Council, before 1943. And you can see when you look at this age cohort that non-Hispanic whites make up 76% of this age cohort, and Hispanics are 15%. But then let your eyes move down one column after the other. And as you go down to younger cohorts, till finally you reach the millennial cohort, those that are born from 1982 or later, you can see that non-Hispanic whites only make up 39% of the Catholic population, and Hispanics make up some 54% of the Catholic population. So we are obviously, as a Catholic population in this country, we're growing. We grew in the last decade by 8.4%. We are becoming more diverse, and because of immigration, we're becoming actually younger as well. So this has an impact on how we configured and why we configured the particular initiatives we did for the Emerging Models program. So let's take a look at this. I've given you how the Hispanic population is beginning to shape the Catholic demographics in our church. Let's look at the next slide, and here is where our Hispanic population is. You'll notice it's from the far west all the way down through the southwest, with very high concentrations, greater than 50% in southern Texas and over in western Texas over there. So you can see that this is where the Hispanic population is. Now I'm going to give you another slide, and we'll indicate something here. Oops, excuse me. There. This is a slide on the change in the number of parishes by state. And if you look at the red and the heavy orange areas, this is where we have actually closed the most parishes. But I show it to you because it's also where the Catholic population had flooded in those great tsunamis of immigration that we had in this country. All those immigrants came in to work the textile mills there in the Northeast, or the steel mills in the northern Midwest states, and you can see there Wisconsin and Ohio and so forth. Well, as those jobs changed, that is to say the factories were shut down, shifted down to the south, or sent overseas, those Catholics basically had to migrate to find work. Some went to the suburbs instead of the urban areas, and others went down south. They went down to Georgia and to Florida and to Texas and elsewhere. And what's important about this is we have a major relocation of Catholic population, but we have churches that are still located in these areas and not where this Catholic population is growing. Now remember that previous slide where I showed you where all the heavy immigration and Hispanics are in the west and southwest. So what you have in the United States is, again, a pastoral planning issue of how do we meet the needs of Catholics who are no longer here where we built all of our churches to accommodate them a century or so ago. Let's look then at another very important element here, and that is the number of priests that we have to serve this burgeoning Catholic population. And again, I point out that it grew by 8.4%. You can see here the number of active diocesan priests in the United States, and the chart begins at that high point year, 1965, where we had about 35,000 diocesan priests, and you could see it starting to go down on the scale there until we are today at around 20,000 diocesan priests, and then it's projected down to, you can see 2040, where it's down to around 12,000 diocesan priests, a little over that, maybe 12,600. What's important about this is that, of course, in order to provide for the liturgical worship and leadership of our parishes, we need to have ordained ministers to do that, particularly priests. And yet we see here a diminution of our ordained priests to the point where by around 2040, both the priests, the numbers of priests will be about what it was in 1948. And the same thing will be true with regards to some of our parishes. So let me move on to another slide. When you look at this, the growing Catholic population, the relocation of Catholics, the immigrants coming in and where they're going, you have bishops and pastoral planners faced with 5 options or pastoral strategies, it seems to me. Number one is to close parishes. People are no longer there, the parishes are too small, the finances to keep them going is too high and so forth, so we're going to close them. A second option would be to consolidate parishes. That's where you take 2 or more parishes and you combine them into one, obviously with a couple of them closing. A third option is if you have a vacancy, there's no longer a resident pastor, what about assigning a parish life coordinator? These are people who fall under Canon 517.2. The bishop can use that canon to appoint a religious lay woman or man, a lay person, male or female, or a deacon, or even a team to basically administer the parish. And you heard me say earlier we have about 400, 450, so maybe 480 of those in the United States today. Another option, of course, is to link parishes, and this is what we call in this particular study of ours, multiple parish ministry, and a little later on I'll get right into that because one of the reports is written on that. And this is where you take parishes, you link them together, and they are served by one pastor and a single staff working out of some particular area. But it does vary, but the point is it's one pastor for POPSI up to 6 parishes. The average nationally that we found in our study was about 2.5 parishes. But I was at a symposium looking at multiple parish ministry and met a woman from Maine who basically talked about 10 parishes that were once together that are all now linked. So another option, the 5th option, is to build bigger churches and offer more masses. And if you were on our webinar, the very first one we did, that Kara did, Mark Gray presented, you know that that's a direction that we have gone in. So let me just comment then on number 1, close parishes, and then quickly on building bigger churches and offering more masses. So you see some statistic on that. I'm not going to comment on consolidating parishes. We did not have a parish report specifically on that, although we have lots of data on consolidated parishes and how they compare with traditional parishes, with multi-parishes, the linked parishes, with parish life coordinator-led parishes, and with multicultural parishes. So there's a lot of good information that's already available on our website, but certainly will be much more as we draw to a close in this project in the next couple of months. So again, first close parishes and then build bigger parishes. So here's where we were. Again, 1965, we had some 17,600 parishes in the United States, and we reached that high point in about 1991-92. You can see 19,300 parishes, and then the curve goes down to where we're now back to 17,900 parishes and even fewer than that since this was done in 2010. So again, the primary driving force for the closing of parishes has been the fact that the Catholic population that I pointed out to you has simply abandoned those areas where we built so many churches, and has gone elsewhere. And then, of course, added to that is the fact that we have the diminution of the number of ordained priests. So that's why we have this as one of the strategies that pastoral planners and bishops are using. Well, we close our parishes. And you can see that in the last decade we declined by 6.6%. Then we are building bigger parishes. That's the other strategy. So here you can see, if you look to the far left there, that we had at one time 25% of our parishes had 200 or fewer households, and now it's down to 15%. And as you move to the right there, you can see that our congregations of 500 to 1,200 were 26%, they're now 28%. And then the far right, you see that our congregations that are the largest, that we measured anyway, which were once 24%, are now 33%. And in addition, I indicated that we are adding masses. So here's the chart on that. It used to be that where parishes had 1 or 2 masses, that used to be 29%, now down to 23%. And go over to where it was 4%, used to be 4 masses, that's now up to 23%, and now 5 or more masses are up to 28%. So 2 strategies that we looked at over the 5 that I identified are close parishes and build bigger churches, which we're doing to accommodate more people and to have more masses. So this is what we're trying to do. So here now is how I'm going to proceed with the reports. First, I'm going to talk about the leadership issues. One has to do with parish life coordinators, of course. I identified that as one of the strategies that could be used. Secondly, we'll look at the next generation of pastoral leaders, recruiting younger people into ministry and having them help out in a variety of ways. And we'll talk about what they discuss themselves about their role as young people in ministry. And then we'll look at pastoral leadership in a multicultural church, because that deals with leadership and what kind of leaders do we need, what are the issues they've got to address. Then we'll turn our attention to congregations, to the multiple parish ministry, the linked parishes that we talked about, and then to the parish business managers and finance councils. And these will be the 5 reports that I will briefly comment on, drawing on some of their findings, but again, not able to cover them all. So beg your understanding on that, and we'll look forward to the posting of all the complete data when it's available on our website. But hopefully you'll come away with a good idea of what these particular projects have been dealing with and what they are finding. And I hope that will be helpful to you as a pastoral minister. So, Parish Life Coordinator Study. Here is Chris Anderson. He's the Executive Director of the National Association for Lay Ministers. So he was the lead agent on this study. And here in his report are some of the key findings based primarily on the CARA data. There was no seminar or gathering of people to look at this. Unlike a lot of the others, we wanted strictly the quantifiable data that CARA was going to provide us. So according to that data, while PLC parishes exhibit some shortcomings, they offer a viable option for preserving a congregation's life and ministry. That's a conclusion that one can reasonably draw looking at how parishioners felt about worshiping, participating in the life of a parish that's led by a parish life coordinator. Now, what they do particularly well is this. They excel at engendering in their parishioners a greater sense of openness to increased involvement in the parish life and its ministry. Their scores were much higher than any other type of parish when it came to how they felt about getting involved in parish life. Where the parishioners said, well, I'm not sure, we're doing as great as we could, it's in the area of providing quality masses and liturgies in general, which I think is most likely due, as I say here, to the lack of consistent presence of a resident priest. I think the parishioners, they gave respectable scores, but in the traditional parish, in the multicultural parishes, in the multi-link parishes, their scores tend to be a little bit higher. But people are attracted to the BLC parishes by, they indicated, the quality of their programs and social outreach. And in fact, the PLC parishes had people at the highest amount of driving. They drove past another parish that they could have attended at the rate of 45% to go to the parish that was led by a PLC leader. So consolidated parishes had a similar score. The average for this was 27% of Catholics go by a parish that's closer to them to go to another parish that they would prefer. So keep that in mind, that Catholics are basically finding where they want to go. And one important thing to consider when you start looking at the data, going to the website, that the in-pew research is a slice of one particular day in which those parishioners were surveyed. And keep in mind, it's the parishioners that were there because they chose to be there, and they chose to be in a location where they wanted to be. So it surprised some people when they saw the data, because they said, well, gee, these are awfully good scores. But what it did tell us is that Catholics who are going to where they want to be for worship and for congregational life, for involvement, for social outreach and so forth, are basically contented. They are happy where they are. So a summary here is that those who attend PLC parishes rate many aspects of their pastoral life at levels that are comparable to how parishioners in traditional, multicultural, multiple, and consolidated parishes rate their experiences. This again goes back to that very first point, that in some ways you can consider a PLC parish a viable option for preserving a congregation's life and ministry. All right, now with that, let's move on then to the next generation of pastoral leaders. And this really was run together by both the Catholic Young Adult Ministry Association. You can see Paul Jersenbosky there. There he is. Doesn't he look dapper in his tuxedo and boutonniere there? And Chris Anderson again, the executive director of NOM. And these two gentlemen led this project, and so they're the lead agents, and they collaborated on the writing of the report, and here are some of their findings, okay? There were obstacles. Now remember, this was primarily out of a seminar that they gathered some 35 people from around the country, and so they really wanted to ask them about what is it like for you as someone under the age of 40 working in a lay ecclesial ministry, working in a parish. What's it like? So a number of these comments you're going to see, these findings, really have to do with their struggles to find a place for themselves in there. So obstacles to better intergenerational workplace, they said, collaboration often involves how each other speaks of the other, each generation. And that's that us-them kind of language where they feel sometimes they're viewed differently. And they in turn view the older generations differently. And they saw that in an honest way as somehow interfering with their ability to really come together as generations for the benefit of the mission. Secondly, the pathways they discussed to ministry have changed, and today's young adults respond to God's call in new and different ways. And this sometimes brought problems because the classic way, over 70%, according to the CARA data that we got, of people who are in parish ministry got there by first volunteering in the parish and then were recognized usually by the pastor and invited to join the staff. Today's young people, particularly the millennials, find themselves responding to a call to ministry oftentimes when they're pursuing higher education, maybe a degree in theology or ministry of some type. And then they will go and locate a position. It may be in a state different from where they're from, and so they're not known by the parish congregation, and they're new to the staff. And they have found that this difference sometimes creates some kinds of difficulties that they have to work through because they come at ministry from a different way of being prepared and from a different location. And there's a little bit of suspicion in there about that. That's what they shared with us. Third, there are two distinct generations that make up today's young adult population. As you would know, Generation Xers, which were born about 1965 to 1980, 1982, and then the millennials, as we call them, 1982 to about 1995. And what our symposium participants pointed out is that, look, we have a lot of diversity in these two generations. There's all sorts of people, Hispanics, Asians, African Americans, Native Americans, you name it. Yet, this diversity that we find in our generations is not reflected in the Catholic workplace. And that is something they felt that we've got to look at as a church. We've got to find out how we have a staff that reflects the population that in fact is in the parish. And you're going to see this theme come up again in the multicultural ministry. And then they said there are significant differences that exist between today's young adults and those of prior generations, especially in terms of workplace styles, monetary expectations, and technology use. Now, if you're familiar with the business literature that has talked about millennials, and they talk about how they had helicopter parents, hovering over them, and even if they lost a soccer game, the parents ensured that they got a trophy, and they were constantly being pampered. And so when it came to the workplace, they were saying, well, how come I'm not advancing, or how come things aren't going my way? And there's been a lot of criticism. But in point of fact, there was an article in the Washington Post that said, well, we have to look at millennials differently. And let me show you one indicator of this. This is one of the CARA questions that we asked. I often feel overworked in my parish ministry or service. And if you look at this, you can see this is clearly generational. So you have pre-Vatican II, people born before 1943, and 8% of them said, no, I'm not stressed out. And you go all the way up to the millennials, and 39%, yeah, I'm feeling a lot of being overworked. So what's going on here? Well, according to an article in the Washington Post written by a business expert, he said, look, what millennials want is what we should all want, and we should not be criticizing them. They basically don't want their job to rule their life. They want time for personal issues in their lives. They want time for family. They want time for their own spirituality. They want time to enjoy things, to recreate, and so forth. They also see their work situation differently. They use social media both for work and for staying in connection with other people. So there's a blurring of the lines between them, their kind of social life, especially through social media, and their work life. And so you see this emphasized here. They also want an appropriate salary for what they do. Where previous generations said, well, I work for the church, that's it, and so forth. So now, this is a chart of our lay ecclesial ministers. You can see that back in the 1992, we had about 21,000 people working in lay ecclesial ministry, and it's now up to 38,000. And the millennials are people really more under the age of 40. It's about 18% of this group of the 38,000 are under the age of 40. It does say here that includes vowed religious, but quite frankly, the vowed religious, women religious in parish ministry is only 3%, and it's even far less than that for the brothers. So basically, you're looking at mostly lay ecclesial ministers here. Let's go back now to the next generation. So again, back to that symposium, today's young adult pastoral ministers seek community both in their workplace and with young adult church workers elsewhere. They also want the church to seriously upgrade its outreach to young adults so that it can become more attractive to and enlivened by them. The issue here is that they feel it's not easy sometimes to be a lay ecclesial minister in a parish when their peers, the people they grew up with, are kind of disengaged from the church. In fact, they might even hold it in some disdain for some of its teachings, and it sort of makes it difficult for them as lay ecclesial ministers, as they expressed it, to feel good about their role when so many of the people they value do not value the church. So that was one of the issues that they brought up. The young adult pastoral ministers also want to be mentored. Some of the older people have the impression that these young people want to come in and they want to throw everything old out. But they said that's not the case. We want to learn from the older people, but we also want our own ideas welcome. And then finally, the young adult ministers said, look, we really want our work to be valued. We have something to contribute. Yes, we come out of it differently, perhaps with different education, with different ideas, but we really have something to contribute. And as one symposium participant told it, when it comes to us, don't think we're just going to pull out. Our chips are all in, and that's why they included that in the report. And then finally, here is the group that actually came to the symposium. And there on the far right, you can see standing with green shirt is Chris Anderson, and seated right down in front of him is Paul Jerzembowski. So that's the group right there. So let's move on then to pastoral leadership in a multicultural church. The lead agent there was Father Richard Vega. He's now the pastor at St. Francis of Rome Parish in Los Angeles, but he was the past president of the National Federation of Priest Councils, and ran this project. So here are some of the findings that he reported in his report. And this is from, much of it from the CARA data, but also from the symposium that he held. Leaders in multicultural parishes are 81% non-Hispanic white, 12% Hispanic, Asian, 4%, African American, 3%, and Native American down to 1%. So that's basically the breakdown we see in our parishes. Now let me just say a word about multicultural parishes, because that's one of our categories. And CARA defines multicultural parishes in one of three categories. One being that they regularly celebrate Mass in a language other than English. A second way in which they consider a parish multicultural is where the percentage of parishioners who are non-Hispanic white is less than 40%. And third, where the diversity index, as they call it, is 33% or higher. And the diversity index basically is where if on a random basis you picked any two parishioners, one is likely to be of another ethnic or racial background. So when that reaches 33%, then they consider that a multicultural parish. So that's when you see us use that in all of the various data charts, that's what we mean. Okay, so most of the Masses celebrated in a language other than English are celebrated in Spanish, 81% of it. Only 9% of our parish leaders use Spanish in their ministry, but 33% of Catholics in the U.S. are Hispanic. Now, what's important about this is that the basic registration in parishes is not a custom for many Hispanics and Asian Catholics. Hispanics register, I think, at about the rate of about 13%. And so when you look at the rolls of a parish, it looks like you have X amount of Hispanic members, but in point of fact, you have 20% more than that in most of these parishes, because when we've asked Hispanics to self-identify, we get a 33% of Catholic population. Multicultural parishes have the largest number of individual registered parishioners. In other words, they were, in our group of sample, they were some of the biggest parishes we have, averaging more than 4,000 per parish. 6% of parish leaders are born outside the United States. And non-Anglo parish leaders are among the most likely to spend more than 60% of their time on evangelization. Now, this was brought out in the report and spelled out because of the concept of shepherding, that for non-Anglo parish leaders, they really view engaging within the parish community and working with people to enliven their faith, to help them to basically open up to the gifts of the Spirit and all of that. So this is a very important way in which they do their ministry, which differs in many ways from the classic Anglo approach, which is kind of from the pulpit, from the altar, and so forth. They are much more peer-oriented, and they call it shepherding. Then the majority of ethnic leaders work in multicultural parishes, where the resources for formation are more limited, but where they feel more comfortable. So you'll find most of those who are in minority populations working in these multicultural parishes. Then ethnic leaders treasure the sense of call to ministry. This is a very important point that's being aired today with regards to issues like credentialing. A call from God and a call from the community. They view it starting with baptism. And often ethnic communities work with a council or a team who is elected by the community, even if not recognized by the parish leadership. In other words, they have their own elders. They have their own leaders that they recognize. And the big issue for them is how do we bring forth this leadership? When the Anglo approach to leadership oftentimes is through education, credentialing, and so forth, they see trying to raise up leaders in a different way because they're different in their culture, and so leadership is different, and it varies from ethnic group to ethnic group. And then the role of the priest is crucial in the calling of ministers. Priests, especially pastors, need to invest time with the ethnic community, but here's one thing, and end on this note. We found out that non-Anglo parish leaders are less likely than Anglos to report receiving encouragement from a priest, 45% compared to 53%. So again, here is just a few of the points that are made in this report about how culture shapes leadership in a multicultural setting. Let's now move to multiple parish ministry, and our lead agent there was Mark Mogilka. He's the Director of Stewardship and Pastoral Service of the Diocese of Green Bay. Mark worked with a wonderful committee And it was an international committee because it had Connie Perry there from London, Ontario. So in Canada, they have similar issues that we do about closing parishes and trying to link parishes. And also on his committee was Kate Wiskus, who teaches at Mundelein Seminary, and they had together with Mark co-authored the book, which you'll see in a second. So let's look at some of their reports. More than 1/4 of all parishes in the United States share a pastor with at least one other parish. And where are those located? Well, more than half are located in the Midwest, and 20% are located in the Northeast. And those are where those areas where we saw a lot of the parish closings and so forth, where bishops and pastoral planners are struggling what to do and how to work this. And the remaining 21% are located in the South and the West. Now, what did we find out from the data that says MPM parishes really are sort of there, they do a little better than the traditional parishes. And here they are. They are better at welcoming new parishioners. You can see the percentages that Mark provides. They're a little better at communicating with parishioners and effectively using committees and councils and collaborating with other parishioners. But what's the other side of the coin? Where perhaps did the data show that they're not quite as up in terms of how people feel about them as are the traditional parishes? And that's in providing social activities and programs, providing accessibility with persons with disabilities, and providing Mass in preferred languages. So again, I'm moving through this very quickly, but again, all this will be posted, and of course, it will be back again on the Ave Maria website, so you can go back over it a little more slowly. So here, and that's the book by Mark and Kate Wiskus, Pastoring Multiple Parishes, which I highly recommend. So only 22% of those who went through parish or reorganization received training in MPM, even though 2/3 of those said that they received the training and found it helpful. But consider that. Less than 1/4 got training in this important thing of reorganizing for multiple parish ministry. And what we discovered at the symposium in particular is that there's no one way to do multiple parish ministry. It just varies, and pastors are encouraged, and the staffs that are going to be involved, you've got to consider what's there, what the congregations are like, who the potential leaders are, and so forth, and work with what you have. And so the greatest difficulties that showed up occurred during the parish organization, or in order of priority, are the unhappiness of parishioners. And what we tried to do was, in fact, I'll pause there, is to say we wanted to find out how people felt about it 5 years after, in fact, the reorganization. That was an important criterion because we didn't want them to be affected in their response to the survey by just involved right then with some kind of parish reorganization. So the unhappiness of parishioners was one of the things that came out. Finding volunteers by staff said that was more difficult than they had counted on, and then finding the interaction of parishioners from the different parishes, getting them to meld, if you will. The number one recommendation from those who had undergone parish organization was to emphasize the importance of constant regular communication with staff, parish leaders, and parishioners. And pastoral leaders are encouraged to shift their vision of multiple parish ministry from one that tends to view it as an undesirable one that is rich in opportunities to one that is rich in opportunities for parish life. And you know, we have that expression now, it's used, that this is the new normal, and I think that's what's happening. Parish linkage is going to become the new normal. The Vatican seems to be pushing the American bishops in this direction, and if you're familiar with the news that came out about Cardinal Schönborn in Austria, he's going to move from, I think it's 160 plus parishes down to 60 plus parishes, maybe 90 at most, and he's going to do it without closing any parishes. So in other words, he's going to be using this linkage model to keep congregations going, and he wants to see emerging lay leadership take place. So you will have centralized pastors coming and serving multiple worship sites. Okay? So let's move quickly on to then the parish business managers. And here are the 3 lead agents there. Chuck Zach, he was is the director for a Center for the Study of Church Management at Villanova University. And Bob Schwanier, he's the director of pastoral planning for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and Father Jim Lang, vicar for parishes, Diocese of Syracuse. And they too, like Mark Mogilka, worked with a committee, a lot of other people involved, but these were the 3 lead agents who did most of the training and the testing of the training modules and so forth. So here's what they found out. When it comes to business managers now, the Ministry of Parish Business Manager varies greatly from parish to parish, and in some cases the person had the title business manager, but basically they were essentially a bookkeeper. And it went all the way along the spectrum up to where someone truly was the chief operating officer under a pastor, responsible for all the finances, responsible for financial policies, responsible for human resources, and so on and so forth. So they really were running the parish. Their backgrounds range from parish volunteer with no formal training to corporate executive embarking on a second career. They are largely female and Caucasian. The females were about 63% in our sample, and the males about 35% as business managers. Some are full-time in their own parish, but many are shared with at least one other parish. They have many constituents, and I think this is important because you have to have a lot of balls in the air. We discovered it in our symposia talking to them. They have the pastor, of course, that he reports to or she reports to, the parishioners, lay parish councils, professional and parish staff, and in some cases a parochial school. So you can see, as I noted earlier, as our parishes especially grow in size, these positions are going to become much more complex, and hence we've got to focus on how are these people being brought forward, how are they being trained, what are their competencies for doing what they're doing. And these parish business managers, we found out, tend to be significantly underprepared to perform a number of functions that many currently perform and that more will be expected to perform in the future as parish organization structures become more complex. So these people, however, were generally pleased with diocesan support and training and benefited from networking with other business managers. And one of the symposiums that I attended at Villanova University, they were just delighted to meet each other and to greet fellow travelers, if you will, in this important ministry. And now for the parish finance councils, and that's, by the way, that picture is of St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Most parish finance councils members were actively engaged in parish operations when they were asked. They provided input into the budgetary process and oversight through their regular review of parish financial statements. Some pastors, however, failed to involve their finance councils or expected them to be nothing more than rubber stamp bodies for the decisions, and that was just a downer to learn that. Although perhaps not surprising. There needs to be more interaction between the parish finance council and the pastoral council and parishioners. That was one of the findings, that there wasn't enough interaction between the pastoral council. Now, you may know that the parish council is the only one mandated by canon law. The pastoral council is not, nor is the business manager, but the parish finance council. So it's very important. The survey of parish leaders disclosed a general lack of preparation among parish finance council members in a number of areas of responsibility, both in the financial and non-financial sectors. Perhaps of greatest concern is the insufficient understanding of diocesan financial policies. And most of the respondents had received, we regret to report, little or no education or training for the role on the finance council. So, a large majority of parishes themselves lacked written guidelines for finance council members. So that brings us to a close on our 5 reports. And again, I regret that I had to cover them so quickly and cover just only some of the points that came out in the reports. But here is where you can get additional information. This is where they're all going to be posted at www.emergingmodels.org. And I always welcome, if any of you want to email me, and I can ask on some of the questions if I don't have an answer to the people who wrote the reports, or you can call my office number at 703-836-7632. And with that, let me stop and entertain any questions there may be.
Thank you, Neil. And you did go very quickly, and I appreciate that. We have about 10 more minutes for questions, so please go ahead and enter those into the question section of your GoToWebinar panel. We have a couple of questions that have already come in, but go ahead and add yours as we discuss here today. One of the most popular questions, Neil, was just if your PowerPoint slides will be available. Will you have these available on the Emerging Models site, or would you like us to make it available to the participants afterwards? Or should they just go to the reports?
You know, Yeah, thank you. I can make this available. I can put it on the Emerging Model site, or if somebody wants to write me, I can certainly be happy to share this information with you. Not a problem.
Okay, good. So look for it there at the Emerging Models, emergingmodels.org, correct?
Yes, or just email me and say, Neil, can you share your presentation with me?
Excellent. Okay, so let's get into the actual questions. Terry asks, what's the definition or role description of the parish life coordinator?
Well, as I indicated, there is I'm not sure there is a single definition. Well, there probably is because it does fall under canon law, but I certainly don't have that before me right now. But the Parish Life Coordinator course goes by a number of titles, sometimes Parish Administrator, Parish Coordinator, and so forth and so on. But basically, this person is responsible for maintaining congregational life in this parish, and that includes the finances and all the things that a pastor would normally do, with the exception that he or she relies on bringing in a priest to officiate at the liturgies.
Okay, great. Mary would like to know how this report is going to be incorporated into the new evangelization efforts.
How this report, my report, or all the reports?
I guess it would be, it probably means all of the reports. Is there any connection? Do you think there's any connection being made or incorporation into the new evangelizations effort? Maybe I think that she's probably talking about this year of faith that we're in right now.
Yeah. Mary, what we intend to do is we're going to hold the symposium that I noted earlier in late January, and then the 5 partners will be staying after that symposium, and we'll be discussing among the issues is how do we communicate to key, not only just to our own constituents, but perhaps to key Episcopal committees that would need to rely on this information, that would help them, in other words. And so I think it's going to be, Mary, probably through those avenues where this information starts to become much more public. There'll probably be press releases. We've done that for each major report that we've put out. There'll be press releases undoubtedly following our symposium. And hopefully this will begin to filter into those who are working with parishes and dioceses with regards to the new evangelization. Because obviously, Mary, I'm glad you saw it. There's a lot of relevance here for that. So thank you for bringing that question forward.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And we have some very similar questions, and I'll read one from Michael, who would like to know: is there any data regarding parishioners voting with feet, i.e., leaving for another Catholic parish due to unhappiness? Does that make sense? So voting with
Yes.
feet, they're leaving to go to another parish because they don't like the change.
No, we did not research that, and that's why I pointed out that, in fact, the 13,000 responses that we have of Catholic parishioners are those who are in the pews that particular Sunday at a location of their preference. And so you got pretty good marks for a lot of elements of Catholic life. And by the way, the 3 top priorities for Catholics that came all the way across are that the parish presents a strong sense of belonging, that you get that feeling there. The second, that was the #1 priority. The second was the quality of preaching. And the third was that they experienced the parish to be a welcoming community. So those are the first 3 priorities that Catholics obviously are looking for, because it came out not only among all the various groups we have, the populations, that is to say, from Anglos to to Hispanics to Asians and so forth. It was amazingly consistent, but it was also amazingly consistent across the types of parishes we had, from multicultural to traditional to parish life coordinators to coordinated parishes and so on. So those top priorities, that's what Catholics are looking for. If you want to know something about why Catholics left, I recommend an American Magazine article that came out, I think it was in April, and It was, let me see, I think, I'm trying to remember the diocese right here in the Northeast, in which the Bishop Connell, who was the president of Catholic University, and it's escaping me, it's right next door to Metuchen, and I wish I could think of it. So if somebody has it, they can say it or write it in, and I can share it with the whole group. But he asked Chuck Zeck, who I pointed out is responsible for our study, along with Father William Byer, who was the former president of Catholic University, to do a study on why Catholics have left. They're no longer participating. It's a fascinating study, and that would be one way, Michael, to get information, at least in one diocese. Trenton, that's the diocese, Trenton.
Yeah, Trenton.
One diocese. So Google that, and you can get that information. It's fascinating reading, and Bishop O'Connell is to be commended for his bravery in asking why people don't want to attend church anymore, Catholic church.
Yeah, that article and then the series of articles that came out afterwards were fascinating. So yeah, everyone's confirming that. Diocese of Trenton, Bishop O'Connell,
good.
American Magazine, April 30th. 2012 in America. So thanks everybody for Googling all that. I'm really fascinated by what you just said about the priorities, belonging, and number 1 and number 3. So number 2 seems kind of evident, right? Better homilies. But number 1 and number 3, welcoming community and belonging. Can you say more about what they meant or what you mean by those responses?
No, they simply were a statement in the survey. So to some degree, you're going to have some subjective interpretation there, because all you can do in the question is sense the sense of belonging I experience in this parish and the sense of welcoming I experience in this parish. That's basically what the question stated, you know what I mean? And so when they were given a whole list of things that they could basically prioritize about why they were attracted to the parish they were. And as I stated earlier, those 3 came out consistently at the top. The belonging, the preaching, and the sense of welcoming, being a welcoming community were in that order, 1, 2, 3. So, but they were simply just short statements that people could choose from within a list of other qualities. You know, social justice programs or religious education or whatever. These were the top 3.
Good. Okay. Thanks. That's fascinating. Okay. Well, when Gene wanted to know where can they find more information about the symposium you mentioned, the one in January?
Actually, great question, Gene. I'm going to be writing to all the participants. We just firmed this up it's going to be held at Washington Theological Union. The dates are going to be January 22nd to 23rd. 22nd, 23rd. So that's the day after Martin Luther King's National Birthday Celebration observance. And it'll be held at the Washington Theological Union. One of the reasons we were a little uncertain is what was going on. The union was going to close, and then they're staying open longer than we thought, and now we can host it there. And I'm going to be writing to all of the people who were past participants. We had some 40 people who were attending, and we had to cancel on, so they're going to get the invitation. And then I would welcome anybody that's interested, would like information. I'll be happy to send it out. We would welcome you if you'd like to come and be part of this, because we're going to go through these reports, and we're going to basically try to see what they say each to the other and try to draw additional inferences and conclusions from these reports.
Okay, thanks. One note is someone just typed in, I thought this was a good comment. Mary was saying when people tell her what belonging means, it means someone mentions that they were missed, so someone noticing that they were gone, and that was, I think, a good comment. And we have a lot of people that are excited about that seminar, so thanks, Neil, for that.
Yeah, Mary, and what's interesting about that is that those are comments that show up in that Trenton survey. You will see somebody when they're interviewed, because the authors, Bill Byron and Chuck Zeck, give a lot of quotes, and one of them struck out at me. She says, when I go to church, I was there and I realized no one would know I was missing. In other words, she longed for community, and there was no way in which she experienced community there, and that was one of the reasons she gave for no longer participating. So thanks for that, Mary.
Good. Well, Neil, these are such, this discussion is just, I feel like, just getting started, and we've run out of time. But everyone's been invited to go to Emerging Models and to read the reports and to find out more about the amazing research that has been going on and to learn about many of the different models that are being applied. So, Neil, thank you so much for your time today and for your synopsis of the different reports.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for tuning in. And again, don't hesitate to contact me if you'd like more information. I'll be happy to respond.
Good. Well, before we sign off, I'd just like to say thanks again to our partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association for Lay Ministry, the National Federation of Priest Councils, and if you're not familiar with the organizations, please go check out their websites. If you're not already a friend of Ave Maria Press online, please connect with us at the various social networking sites seen below, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Vimeo, where this video will be posted. We also have an app on the App Store. If you'd like to get the recording of this presentation, we'll be emailing it to you later this week, but you can also go to the web address avemariapress.com/webinar-videos for all the recordings of past webinars. Finally, please mark your calendars for the next webinar, which will be December 4th, 2012. David Aker and Jan Nelson, authors of the Bereavement Ministry Program, A Comprehensive Guide for Churches, will share their insights in a presentation titled Bereavement Ministry, Giving Voice to Our Grief and Suffering. So thanks again, everybody, for coming. Have a great afternoon.